Australia is roughly in the top 10 in the world for grain exporting, and extreme ramifications are on the table for heavily traded exposed Australia and across the world, and that's due to the unfolding crisis in Ukraine. Joining me now is agricultural market analyst Andrew Whitelaw. Thanks so much for joining us, Andrew. Let's talk about the impact Ukraine and Russia combined. They've got 1/3 of global exports of wheat and barley. What sort of impact globally are we having now? And I guess a difficult question to answer specifically, but what could we be in for?
Look, it's had a huge impact just the past week since the invasion started. About 2 to 3 weeks ago, wheat prices on the global level were about 400 Aussie dollars a tonne. They're now above $600 a tonne. And the long-term average is more like $280 to $320 a tonne. So we're really sitting at a situation where the world's wheat price is extremely high. It's now, in Australian dollar terms, it's the highest price we've ever had in history, in nominal terms. So this is going to have huge ramifications beyond what we're seeing in Ukraine. It's clearly a huge impact in Ukraine from a humanitarian point of view. But when you take away 1/3 of the world's barley and wheat supplies and about 20% of its rapeseed supply, 50% of its sunflower oil supply, you're taking big chunks of supply away from the marketplace. And markets are driven by supply and demand. If you've got low supply, prices go through the roof. Demand is linear. Demand is the same today as it was a month ago. It's just the supply has been removed. And it's going to have huge ramifications for maybe not so much us as consumers in Australia. We'll probably not notice that our bread might go up in price by a little bit. But places like Egypt, Algeria, Tunisia, these are places where they have a lot of their diet is based on bread. A lot of their daily spend is on bread. So when the grain price rises like a rocket, it basically means that it's unsustainable for these nations to continue to purchase wheat. And we know in the past, we can see a really direct correlation between rising food prices and political instability. The Arab Spring, the Mexican taco protests were all centered around increasing prices of wheat and corn. So we're coming into a really scary situation where we've taken away 1/3 of the world's wheat supply overnight, practically. But we've also come into a period where places like North Africa, they're quite dry. They actually produce their own wheat, but it's likely that the wheat production is on track to be lower than normal. So they're actually going to have to buy more at a time when there's less available. So that pushes up prices again. It pushes up their import demand. And it's going to be a real struggle for those countries to be able to afford wheat at 600 Aussie dollars a tonne. And that is a big concern for the stability of that region, because we're not talking about wealthy people. We're talking about poor people who survive on practically a diet which consists largely of grains. So it's a really big concern, and something that even if the war in Ukraine stops tomorrow, there will still be issues with food security and food inflation through the Middle East and North Africa for the coming months, if not the next year and a half. And that's if the war stops soon. If the war doesn't, sorry.
No, it's a huge situation. So keep going. So yeah, if the war does keep going, what do you anticipate?
Well, the one thing we've been saying at the moment is I guess we've used this term a lot in the last couple of years, as unprecedented, and it is a really difficult period to predict as an analyst, because we're talking about a major geopolitical issue. What will happen is that the longer and the more severe that this war becomes, the more impact it'll have on global food supply chains. At the moment, if we look at wheat, about 90 to 95% of Ukraine's wheat is already actually planted and growing. The issue we have is in about 2 to 3 months, we're going to have that harvested. And if that's not harvested because they don't have access to fuel, if they're 18 to 60-year-old men are fighting the Russians, then that takes that supply off, not just for just now, but also for the 12 months preceding what would be the normal Ukrainian harvest. So the longer this goes on, the more risk we have in places around the world of being food insecure. So it's a really quite a scary thought. And a lot of countries are looking at this and are changing policies. A couple of European countries are trying to bring out import bans to keep food within the country, or opening up their borders to countries that we wouldn't normally buy grain from. And look, there's a possibility that even the likes of China, which has an effective ban on our barley, may come back to the table in the coming months because they're worried about rampant food inflation there as well. So it's really an environment that is changing on an hour-by-hour basis.
It certainly is. We're going to have to wrap it up. But just quickly, Andrew, oil and gas, other products like fertilisers, we're certainly seeing a price rise here and across the world. What do you anticipate with these commodities?
Again, Russia is a huge exporter of commodities that we might not even think about. Gas and oil are the key ones, but they also turn gas and oil into fertilizer. So they're one of the biggest fertilizer exporters. They're talking about export bans, but they've also got sanctions from some countries for exports of fertilizer. So, and also the lack of access to SWIFT. What this means is that you've got less fertilizer available around the world, and to produce the highest volumes of food, you need fertilizer. You need access to diesel. And at the moment, we've got close to record fertilizer prices. We've got close to record diesel prices, and also close to record agricultural chemical prices. So all the things that we need around the world to make food are close to record prices, if not record pricing. And that means that a lot of farmers will potentially use less and not produce as much on a global level.
Well, thank you for bringing that unfortunate news to us. But yes, it's very interesting to hear your commentary, and we will certainly be watching very closely the outcome, of course, with the crisis and how it is affecting the global trade market, the commodities and so forth. Thank you so much for your time today, agricultural market analyst Andrew Whitelaw. See you soon.
No worries. Thanks for having me.